So this is going to be kind of a quick video. It's not going to have my usual stellar production values. But I was at the first couple nights of the American leg of the last Domino tour in Chicago, Monday and Tuesday. And it's been enough time since then that I've kind of got my sleep caught up on and been able to process it a little bit. So just wanted to quickly put down my thoughts about what the show was like. Really quick before I get into that, I'm Hans from Electric Brain, Electric Shadow. We do music that is very influenced by Genesis, among other things, so check us out if you're a fan of theirs. We're on Bandcamp, Spotify, all the other places you would normally find music. So I actually flew from Washington State. I flew from the Seattle airport to Chicago for those shows. I picked Chicago because of all the cities where they were doing 2 nights, that was the one that was cheapest to get to from Seattle. And since I've been a fan, they've only toured once, which was the 2007 show. When that happened, I was going to grad school in Alaska, and so, I wasn't close to anywhere they were playing, and I didn't really have the money to get close. So this was really the one chance that I would have had to actually see a Genesis show. So the big question that I had, and I think a lot of people had going in, was the vocals, right? Phil Collins has had some pretty well-documented health issues. It was known ahead of time that he was going to be sitting in a chair. He didn't play drums during this show. So, he honestly didn't sound that good in the rehearsal footage that we saw before the actual concert started. So there was some question about how that would be. And you could definitely tell that there were accommodations being made, right? Back in 2007, they were already adjusting some of the songs to lower keys. And, you could tell that he was maybe rearranging some of the vocal lines a bit, either to avoid having to belt or do long sustained notes, or just kind of to get away from some of the higher notes. And they did also have a couple of backing singers who were assisting with some of the bigger choruses, who were kind of filling in on some of the more sustained notes. But I thought if you were willing to forgive those adjustments, if you're willing to forgive those constraints, the vocals actually sounded really good. Phil was generally very expressive, fairly powerful relative to the situation, always, on key. And the backing vocals, I thought, blended really well into what he did. So the support that that the backing vocals were providing was fairly invisible a lot of the time. And, even though he was in a chair, the way that they were using the camera and the Jumbotron still allowed him to be very expressive, still allowed him to be a really significant presence and a pretty effective frontman under the circumstances. So I thought his part in that came off really well, and, I really appreciated the effort that he did and the kind of craft of the staging around it to really allow that to succeed. Now, I know that sometimes vocals can sound really good, when you're there in person, but then if you go listen to the live album or watch the DVD, then maybe there's some quality issues in the details that you can hear that you weren't aware of when you were there, right? But being there in person, I thought it was really powerful, really effective. I do have to admit that he either forgot or messed up a decent number of lyrics. It was really the most noticeable on No Son of Mine and Domino on the first night. And, at the times when he was singing everything correctly, it was fairly obvious sometimes that he was looking at a lyric sheet. And I guess, if you think about it, something like No Son of Mine, right? He really only would have done that on one tour cycle in 1991 and one tour cycle in 2007, right? And I doubt that he ever listens to that song much, in the meantime. So, he would, in some sense, probably have had to kind of relearn that song from scratch at 70, right? So I get why he might have been somewhat slippery on some of the details of the lyrics to that. I did think it was interesting that, as far as I could tell, he really nailed the older stuff, right? Like they close with Carpet Crawlers and That's a song that has a lot of, weird non sequiturs, and it's a very dense lyric, and he did that perfectly, right? And didn't really seem to be looking at a sheet the way that he was with some of the other songs, or the way that I clearly am with my talking points here. So, it's kind of interesting to me that it makes sense when you think about it, because he did that song on so many more tour cycles, but it does seem like the 70s stuff is really kind of in the deep structures of his memory in a way that the later 80s and the We Can't Dance stuff isn't so much. I feel bad even mentioning this, honestly, but it is something I was aware of during the show. It is something that took me out of the show a little bit sometimes, so I do have to bring it up. But I mean, I want to make it clear that my overall feeling about it is I'm not bothered that he missed some lyrics. I'm appreciative that he was showing up and putting in the work in spite of some pretty obvious struggles, right? Otherwise, the live sound of the overall band, the mixing, those were fantastic. I thought, Tony, Daryl, Mike, they sounded pretty much like they would have in 1991, for as far as I could tell from live albums from that period, right? Nick, with my eyes closed, Nick could have been Phil or Chester. He really played everything spotlessly, perfectly, right? And exactly how I would have expected it from the recordings, both live and studio. Now, again, that might be something where really, like having a DVD or a live album, being able to pick over every detail, maybe there are things I would notice that I'm not now. But absent that kind of really, really careful scrutiny, I thought he did fantastic. As far as the set list goes, I had avoided looking at that before the show. So if you're doing the same, if you're trying to avoid any spoilers, then I'll try to remember to put a time code here that you can jump to, where you can avoid those spoilers. With that warning out of the way, I'm not going to go through the whole set list really, because I don't think there's anything that surprising on it. Uh, I think, off the top of my head, without checking this for sure, but I'm pretty sure everything that they played at the show was something that was either played on the We Can't Dance tour or was played at the 2007 reunion, and in most cases was played at both of those, right? There's already a decent amount of overlap between those two tours. Really, there wasn't anything that was either surprising for being left off, and there wasn't anything that was as surprising as, say, Ripples would have been in 2007, right? So, very, very standard show. And, I get that with a big, complex show like this, where there's a huge amount of financial stake and a really big, broad audience that they have to play to, I do understand that, they just don't have that much latitude in their choices. Just based on my own informal assessment, I'd say probably, only 10 or 15% of the people who were actually there would have been that excited to hear, like, Fountain of Salmacis or One for the Vine, right? So I really can't get upset about that. It was something that was kind of baked in from the beginning. It is what it is, right? And I mean, they already, even the We Can't Dance set list or the 2007 set list, right? It did emphasize, at the very least, even though it's heavy on the trio stuff, it does emphasize some of the longer, more complex songs from that period. So that's fine. As far as specific nitpicks about the set, I know that they had been playing Duchess in the UK. They swapped that out for Misunderstanding, which was too bad. I would much rather have heard Duchess. They did Fading Lights without the big instrumental, which was quite disappointing when I realized they were doing that. They did segue into Cinema Show, but it was a very kind of awkward suture. Obviously, I was happy to hear Cinema Show. Perfect World, I would rather have also heard the big instrumental part from Fading Lights, right? So, whatever, I guess that's a minor quibble. Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, they turned into kind of like an adult contemporary thing with, woodblock and big soft pads. wasn't really too keen on that choice, but again, you know, they have to play to the audience that they have, I suppose. Those things are really my only complaints with the set list, and I suppose the only reason that I'm picking those out is uh, they were the few things there that were surprising, and they're kind of all bad surprises in a way, right? The visuals and the lights were excellent, I thought. I mean, that's something that they have always done well. It's something they have a huge budget for, so, you know, you would expect that they would be able to pull that off, right? There was one aspect of the visual presentation in particular that really struck me, which was during the song Throwing It All Away, which frankly I'm not that big a fan of as a song, you know, but I might be a lot more attached to it now because of the way they used it in the show, actually. During that song, they did this thing where they had like the screens showing a series of spines of cassettes of old Genesis albums. Well, Genesis albums of all ages, but I guess they're kind of all old albums now. But they had that series of spines, and the spines would interchange with live footage and video footage of various eras of the band. And something about that I found incredibly touching. And I mean, I suppose that particular visual choice is kind of odd for a love song, right? You could argue maybe it would have made more sense with Fading Lights. Maybe it would have been too on the nose with Fading Lights, but whatever. I guess the song Throwing It All Away, you know, it does end with the line, I don't want to go, right? Which is a very poignant thing to be saying while watching this kind of valediction and summary of a very long career. But anyway, like I said, you know, something about that visual in particular really moved me. And frankly, I mean, I cried quite a bit during that song on both nights, particularly the first night. It was kind of embarrassing. You know, at one point, a woman came up to me and I thought she was going to ask if I was okay, but she was just trying to figure out if this was her row. So that was a nice relief, right? I didn't want anybody to talk to me. So I'm not totally sure why that was quite so moving. It's something I still have to think about a bit. Maybe it's obvious and I shouldn't overthink it, you know. But that meant a lot to me and was probably the part of the visual staging that I thought was the most effective. You know, I'm 37, right? And Genesis has been my favorite band just kind of officially by default since I was 10. And obviously my relationship to the material has changed a bit as I've gotten older and as my tastes in general have shifted and as I've gotten into other things, right? You know, when the 2007 tour came through, I was really into a lot of black and death metal. And, you know, maybe would have made more effort, frankly, to get out to that show if I hadn't been in quite so much of a metalhead phase then, right? But even then, I mean, in a very kind of core way, there's just something about the fandom of Genesis that was the wellspring for every other kind of music fandom for me, right? So they're really the only band that I would have gone to the trouble and expense that I did to see a couple of their shows, you know, particularly relatively late in their career when they're, you know, what some people might consider to be past their prime, right? But it was, in the end, it was a pretty good experience. I am very glad that I did. It meant a lot to me personally. And, you know, if anybody is on the fence as to whether or not they want to go, if you still have the opportunity, I definitely urge that you do.